Your mind doesn't stop. Not when you want it to. Not when you need peace. Not even when nothing is happening. It just keeps going. You lie down at night, and suddenly, everything comes back. A conversation from earlier. Something you said. Something you should have said. And then it begins. What if I sounded stupid? What if they think less of me? What if I just made everything worse? One thought turns into two. Two turns into 10. And before you even realize it, you're no longer thinking. You're trapped. Your body is still. But your mind is running. Faster and faster. You try to stop. You tell yourself, relax. It's not a big deal. Just let it go. But it doesn't work. Because now you're not just thinking. You're thinking about your thinking. And that's where the real problem begins. Overthinking is not just having too many thoughts. It's losing control over them. It's when your mind stops being a tool and starts becoming a loop. You replay the same situation over and over again. You imagine different outcomes, different endings, better ones, worse ones, none of them real. But your mind reacts as if they are. Your chest tightens. Your breathing changes. Your focus disappears. All because of something that isn't even happening. And yet, it feels important. It feels like you have to figure it out. Like if you just think a little more, you'll finally get clarity. But that clarity never comes. Instead, you just go deeper. This is the trap. The more you try to solve it by thinking, the more you get stuck inside it. And most people live like this every day. Walking around, talking normally, doing their work. But inside, their mind never rests. Constant noise, constant pressure, constant overthinking. And they think this is normal. But it's not. 2,000 years ago, long before phones, long before social media, long before constant stimulation, people faced the exact same problem. The same restless mind, the same endless thoughts, the same inner chaos. But instead of being controlled by it, they learned how to control it. Not by stopping thoughts, but by understanding them, by stepping back from them, by refusing to follow every single one. This is what Stoicism teaches. Not how to think more, but how to stop being controlled by your thoughts. And once you understand this, everything changes. Because the goal is not to have a silent mind. The goal is to have a mind that no longer controls you. If your mind feels like this, if you've ever felt stuck inside your own thoughts, subscribe. Because in this video, you're going to learn how to finally step out of it. So the real question is, why does your mind do this in the first place? Why you overthink? Your mind is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. Protect you. For most of human history, a quiet mind was dangerous. If you weren't thinking, you weren't paying attention. And if you weren't paying attention, you didn't survive. So your brain evolved to do one thing extremely well. Look for problems. Constantly. It scans your environment. It scans your memories. It scans your future. Searching for anything that could go wrong. And when it finds something, it doesn't just notice it. It zooms in. What if this becomes a problem? What if this gets worse? What if I'm not prepared? This is not a flaw. This is survival. The problem is, you don't live in that world anymore. There is no immediate danger. No predators. No life or death threats. But your mind still acts like there is. So instead of real danger, it creates psychological ones. A message that hasn't been replied to. A small mistake you made. A look someone gave you. And suddenly, your mind treats it like a threat. You start analyzing it, replaying it, breaking it down, trying to understand what it means. But here's what's really happening. Your mind is trying to gain control by predicting the future. If I think about this enough, I can prevent something bad from happening. That's the illusion. Because no matter how much you think, you still don't control the outcome. And deep down, your mind knows that. So it keeps going. More thoughts, more scenarios, more possibilities, endlessly. Seneca once wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Think about that. Most of what stresses you has not happened. Most of what you fear is not real. It exists only in your mind. But your body doesn't know that. Your heart still reacts. Your breathing still changes. Your focus disappears. Because to your brain, imagined danger feels like real danger. And that's why overthinking is so exhausting. You're not just thinking. You're experiencing the same stress over and over again, without anything actually happening. And then something even worse happens. You start believing your thoughts. Not questioning them. Not observing them. Believing them. If I feel this way, it must be true. If I'm thinking this, it must matter. So you give the thought attention. And attention is what makes it grow. The more you focus on a thought, the stronger it becomes, until it starts controlling you. Your mood, your decisions, your actions, all influenced by something that might not even be real. This is the loop. You think right, pointing arrow, you react right, pointing arrow, you reinforce the thought. And the loop repeats again and again and again until you're no longer in control. But here's the truth most people never realize. The problem is not your thoughts. The problem is, you were never taught how to deal with them. So if you can't stop thoughts from appearing, what exactly can you control? Stoic principle. So if you can't stop thoughts from appearing, what exactly can you control? This is where most people go wrong. They try to control their thoughts. They try to force themselves to think positively, to stay calm, to fix their mind. But the harder they try, the worse it gets. Because they're fighting something that was never meant to be controlled. You cannot stop thoughts from appearing. Just like you cannot stop the wind from blowing. It comes. It goes. Whether you want it to or not. And the Stoics understood this. They didn't waste time trying to control what was impossible. Instead, they focused on the one thing that actually is in your control. Your response. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Most people read that and misunderstand it. They think it means controlling every thought. It doesn't. It means something much simpler and much more powerful. You don't control what appears in your mind, but you control what you do with it. A thought appears. You're going to fail. You didn't choose that thought. But what happens next is where your power begins. You can believe it. You can react to it. You can follow it. Or you can do nothing. You can see it and let it pass. That is the difference. The thought is automatic. The reaction is a choice. And that one distinction changes everything. Epictetus said, "It's not things that disturb us, but our judgments about them. Not the thought, but what you believe about it, what you attach to it, what you turn it into." That's where suffering begins. Most people never notice this moment. The moment between a thought appearing and them reacting to it. It happens so fast. It feels like the same thing. But it's not. There is a gap, a small space, between the thought and your reaction. And inside that space is your control. Most people live their entire lives without ever seeing it. They react instantly. Thought right pointing arrow, emotion right pointing arrow, reaction. No pause. No awareness. Just automatic behavior. But once you see the gap, you can use it. You can slow things down. You can choose not to follow the thought, not to turn it into a story, not to give it meaning. And when you do that, something changes. The thought loses power because it's no longer being fed. You're no longer reacting. You're observing. And that's the shift Stoicism teaches. From being inside your thoughts to standing outside them. From being controlled to being aware. Seneca hinted at this when he said, "A man who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." The thought is not the suffering. Your reaction is. Once you understand this, you stop trying to control everything. You stop fighting your mind. You stop believing every thought. And slowly, you take your control back. But knowing this is not enough. Because in the moment, when thoughts feel real, how do you actually stop reacting? Control your attention. But knowing this is not enough. Because in the moment, when a thought hits you, it doesn't feel like you have a choice. It feels real, immediate, important. A thought appears, and before you even notice, you're already inside it. You're not observing it. You're living it. That's why people say, just don't react. But that advice almost never works. Because the problem is not reaction. The problem is attention. Attention is what connects you to the thought. A thought by itself is harmless. It's just a sentence, a signal, a random mental event. But the moment you give it attention, it becomes something else. It becomes important. It becomes emotional. It becomes real. And that's where the trap begins. Epictetus said, if someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit. Not because the thought appeared, but because you followed it. That's the key. You didn't choose the thought, but you chose to stay with it. And the longer you stay, the stronger it becomes. So the question is not, how do I stop thinking? The real question is, how do I stop following every thought? That's where control begins. Imagine this. You're sitting quietly, and a thought appears. What if everything goes wrong? Normally, you would follow it. You would imagine scenarios, feel anxiety, build a story. But this time, you do something different. You pause. You notice the thought, not as truth, but as a thought. This is just my mind talking. That one sentence creates distance. Now you're no longer inside the thought. You're looking at it. And that changes everything. Because now, there is space. Space between you and the thought. And inside that space, you have a choice. You can follow it, or you can let it pass. Like a cloud in the sky. Marcus Aurelius wrote, you don't have to turn this into something. Not every thought needs a reaction. Not every feeling needs a story. Most thoughts don't need anything from you. They just need your attention. And if you stop giving it, they weaken. Not instantly, but inevitably. Because attention is the fuel of thought. Whatever you focus on grows. If you focus on fear, fear expands. If you focus on doubt, doubt multiplies. But if you stop feeding them, they fade. And that's what most people never learn. They try to control their thoughts without ever controlling their attention. So they stay stuck, jumping from one thought to another, endlessly. But once you understand this, you realize something powerful. You don't need to control your mind. You only need to control where you place your attention. And once you do that, the mind follows. If this is starting to change how you see your mind, subscribe. Because what comes next is where you actually take control. Because understanding attention is one thing, but applying it in real life is where everything changes. Stoic practice. Because understanding attention is one thing, but using it in real life is something else. Because when the moment comes, you don't feel calm. You feel pulled. A thought appears, and it doesn't ask for permission. It just takes over. So the question is not, do you understand the idea? The real question is, can you apply it when it matters? This is where practice begins. And the Stoic approach is surprisingly simple. Not easy, but simple. A thought appears. Instead of reacting, you pause. Not a long pause. Just a moment. A small break between the thought and your reaction. And in that moment, you do one thing. You name it. This is anxiety. This is fear. This is overthinking. That's it. You don't fight it. You don't argue with it. You don't try to make it disappear. You just recognize it. And something subtle happens. The moment you name it, you separate yourself from it. It's no longer, I am anxious. It becomes, I am noticing anxiety. That shift is power. Because now, you are not the thought. You are the observer of it. And once you create that distance, you do the second step. You do nothing. No reaction. No engagement. You let it sit. And this is the part most people struggle with. Because it feels wrong. It feels like you should do something. Fix it. Solve it. Think it through. But that urge is the loop. And if you follow it, you go right back inside. So instead, you stay still. You let the thought be there, without touching it, like hearing a noise in the background, but not turning toward it. At first, it feels uncomfortable, because your mind is used to control. It wants answers, but you don't give it any. You just stay present. You feel your breath. You notice your body. You return to what is in front of you. And slowly, something changes. The thought starts to lose intensity. Not because you pushed it away, but because you stopped feeding it. Marcus Aurelius practiced this constantly. He wrote to himself, "Discard your misperceptions. Stop being jerked like a puppet." That's what this is. Not controlling thoughts, but refusing to be controlled by them. And the more you practice this, the stronger it becomes. At first, you'll forget. You'll get pulled in. React automatically. That's normal. But then, you'll start catching it. 1 second earlier. Then 2. Then right as it happens. And eventually, you'll see the thought before it pulls you in. And in that moment, you'll choose not to follow it. That's the practice. Simple, repeatable, and over time, it changes everything. Because the loop breaks, not by force, but by awareness. But there's something even deeper. Something most people never realize about overthinking. And once you see it, it changes how you experience your own mind completely. Deep insight. But there's something deeper. Something most people never question. Overthinking feels real. That's why it's so powerful. When a thought appears, you don't experience it as a thought. You experience it as reality. You imagine a situation, and your body reacts, as if it's actually happening. Your heart rate changes. Your breathing becomes shallow. Your muscles tighten. All from something that doesn't exist. That's the illusion. Your mind creates a story, and your body believes it, without asking if it's true. Seneca warned about this thousands of years ago. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Think about that. Most of your stress is not coming from real events. It's coming from imagined ones. Things that might happen. Things that could go wrong. Things that haven't happened yet. But your brain doesn't wait. It reacts now. And that's why overthinking feels so overwhelming. Because you're not just thinking. You're experiencing fear, over and over again, without anything actually happening. And here's the part most people never realize. The mind is not trying to hurt you. It's trying to protect you. By preparing you. If I think about this enough, I'll be ready. I won't get caught off guard. But instead of preparing you, it traps you. Because there is no end. There is always another scenario. Another possibility. Another, what if? So the mind keeps going. Not because it's effective, but because it's uncertain. And uncertainty is what the mind hates most. So it tries to eliminate it. By thinking more. But the more it thinks, the more uncertainty it creates. And that's the paradox. You overthink to feel in control. But overthinking is what makes you lose control. The Stoics saw this clearly. They understood that the problem was not uncertainty. The problem was the refusal to accept it. Epictetus said, "Some things are up to us, and some things are not." Simple. But most people live the opposite way. They try to control outcomes, control opinions, control the future. And when they can't, they think more, trying to force clarity where none exists. But clarity doesn't come from thinking more. It comes from seeing clearly. Seeing that most thoughts are not instructions. They're just noise. Temporary, unstable, passing. And once you truly understand that, something shifts. You stop taking every thought seriously. You stop reacting to every possibility. You stop turning imagination into suffering. And slowly, the mind begins to quiet. Not because thoughts disappear, but because you stop believing all of them. That's the deeper insight. Not control through force, but freedom through understanding. And once you see this clearly, it doesn't stay as an idea. It becomes something you live, something you practice every single day. Stoic habits. And once you see this clearly, it doesn't stay as an idea. It becomes something you live. Not perfectly, but repeatedly. Because this isn't something you understand once, and then you're done. This is something you practice every day. In small moments, a thought appears. You notice it. For a second, you almost follow it. You almost react. That old habit is still there. That urge to analyze, to fix, to control. And for a moment, it feels automatic. But this time, you catch it. Right there. In that small space. Between the thought and your reaction. You see it. And instead of going deeper, you stop. Not by force, but by awareness. You take a breath. You don't argue with the thought. You don't push it away. You just don't follow it. And then, you return to what you were doing. To the present moment. That's it. Nothing dramatic. But something powerful just happened. You broke the pattern. And that moment is everything. Because this is how change actually happens. Not in big decisions, but in small ones. Repeated. Again, and again, and again. Later that day, it happens again. Another thought. Another, what if? Another chance to get pulled in. And again. You almost follow it. But this time, you recognize it faster. You don't go as deep. You don't stay as long. You step out sooner. And over time, that difference grows. You start noticing thoughts earlier. You react less. You recover faster. And slowly, something changes. What used to control you becomes something you observe. What used to feel overwhelming becomes manageable. Not because life is easier, but because your mind is quieter. Not silent, but stable. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Not the number of them. Not how many you can analyze, but how you relate to them. And that relationship is built daily, through practice, through awareness, through choosing not to follow every thought. Eventually, something subtle happens. You don't have to try as hard. The pause becomes natural. The awareness becomes automatic. And thoughts lose their urgency. They still appear, but they no longer demand your attention. They pass, like background noise. And you remain centered. That's when you know. It's no longer just something you do. It's who you've become. And when you reach that point, you begin to understand something deeper. The goal was never to stop thinking. It was to stop being controlled by your thoughts. And when you reach that point, you begin to see things differently. Not outside, but inside. Your mind is still active. Thoughts still appear. Nothing magical happens. You don't suddenly become silent. But something deeper changes. You are no longer controlled. A thought appears, and instead of pulling you in, it passes. You see it, but you don't become it. And that is the difference. Because the goal was never to stop thinking. That was never realistic. The goal was freedom. Freedom from the noise. Freedom from the loops. Freedom from the constant pressure of needing to figure everything out. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." Think about that. Freedom is not about controlling the world. It's about controlling your response to it. And most people never experience that. They spend their lives trying to control everything outside. People, situations, outcomes. And when they can't, their mind turns against them. More thinking, more worrying, more overthinking. But once you understand this, you stop fighting the wrong battle. You stop trying to control every thought. You stop trying to predict every outcome. You stop trying to eliminate uncertainty. And instead, you learn to stand above it, to observe it, to let it pass. And in that moment, you realize something. Peace was never about having no thoughts. It was about not being disturbed by them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." And now, that sentence makes sense. Not as an idea, but as something real. Something you can feel. A thought appears. You don't react. You don't follow it. You don't turn it into a story. You just let it pass. And for the first time, your mind is not pulling you. You are steady, grounded, in control. That is the Stoic way. Not perfection, but control. Not silence, but stability. Not escaping thoughts, but rising above them. And once you experience that, even for a moment, you'll never look at your mind the same way again. If you want to master your mind, not by force, but by understanding, subscribe. Because this is not just one video. This is a way of living. Your thoughts will always be there. The question is, will you follow them?